Okay, and we are very much live, I believe, at this point. How's everybody doing today? Everybody,
good,
welcome to the Deering Live. Thank you for joining us again on this delightful Thursday, earlier time, mainly because our special guest today is in the UK. And so we're doing it earlier so that he can get a good night's sleep tonight. And I want to talk a little bit about our guest today. Quite honestly, if you haven't heard of him before, everything about the way he approaches banjo pretty much is unorthodox. And by its very nature is what makes him such a unique and spectacular player. I actually first met Dan, I think it was around 2015, when I was here in the US at Deering. And he came in. I wasn't sure who he was, but he came in and he performed one of his pieces called Whiplash Reel. So imagine my shock watching a British guy basically playing a funk-laden Indian sitar sounding groovy piece in a clawhammer banjo style, quite honestly, on an instrument that many would argue is not really a clawhammer banjo at all. It's reserved for bluegrass on a Sierra. So my mind was pretty much blown, not only by the quality of the playing, but the fact that, you know, here I was again being shown how the boundaries of the banjo could be completely blown out the water. And I'm talking about the man himself, Mr. Dan Walsh. Dan, how are you, man?
Well, I'm very well, especially after that introduction. Thank you very much. That was
You're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
I should say, hello, mate. How you doing? That's how I should do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Dave is with us as always. Dave, how are you?
Hey, how you doing? I'm doing well. Good to be here.
And you're in Louisiana, so we've got a host of locations today. So, as always, all right, let's kick things off. Mr. Dan, would you mind playing a little something for us to get things started?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll kick off with a jig and a reel. So this is a great jig called Calliope House, which is one of my very favorite tunes, and it goes into a tune which I wrote called Tuesday Night Session.
Pretty phenomenal. Nice job.
Great.
That's really cool. Really cool.
Much.
Hey Dan, thanks for joining us today, man. I haven't seen you in a while, which is really odd because normally you quite often make your way out here to California, right? On little shindigs every now and again.
Yes, I love to come out there. Sadly, might not happen for a little while by the looks of it, but yes, I do enjoy my trips very much.
Yeah, and it's always a pleasure when you make it down to the factory. So, yeah, it's great to have you on, and yet another example of a banjo player that really isn't doing things by the book, shall we say? And there are many books out there that tell you how you need to do it, and I think it's important that people go down that road. But your kind of uptake at an early age was a little different to most. And I remember you telling me when you first came here, like asked the obvious question, like, "Hey, how did you get started?" And you kind of basically said, "Yeah, I accidentally took up the wrong instrument by way of the kind of music you were listening to." Can you give us an insight into how that all came about from a young?
Yeah, it was weird. It turned out I wanted to play the trumpet, but I just took up completely the wrong thing.
There you go.
Yeah, no.
Miles Davis played banjo. You're okay.
Yeah, it's I always wanted to play guitar, like right from the kind of as soon as I could talk. I was sort of badgering my mum and dad to play guitar, and because my parents are wonderful people, they got me guitar lessons and a guitar when I was probably about 8, I think. And the banjo thing really came about when I was I'm a lifelong fan of Irish and Scottish, particularly Irish traditional music. And really that's still my first love. I think that's what I always kind of come back to, whatever kind of genres I go off and experiment with. I always end up coming back to the jigs and the reels. I think that's definitely my first sort of love. And a couple of banjo players in particular, Jerry O'Connor and Barney McKenna, were the two players that really made me go, I really want to try the banjo. And again, my parents being wonderful, they went to the music shop in Stafford, where I'm from, and said, "My son wants to play the banjo. Do you know anybody anywhere near here who teaches banjo? And indeed, do you have any banjos?" And they found me lessons with a guy called George Davis in Cannock, who is an absolute legend, basically, and fortunately a wonderful, wonderful banjo teacher, because he was just about the only option. And this is pre kind of Skype and all that sort of thing as well. So it really was, he was such a lucky find. It's unbelievable. And he said to my parents, "I teach 5-string melodic clawhammer banjo. How does that sound?" And of course, we didn't know anything, so we were just like, "Yeah, it sounds great." And I discovered about 18 months into playing that all the Irish music I'd listened to had been on a completely different instrument to this one. So I discovered I'd been listening to tenor banjo my entire life. But I had no idea. So by this point, I was so into clawhammer, and I loved the style so much. And I was, again, doubly fortunate because George, like me, isn't American. He came at banjo. He was a piano player and a sort of kind of a rock musician, and I suppose more than anything, and discovered banjo through a few vinyl records, taught himself. So he came at it from quite an open sort of mind as well in terms of what the banjo could do. And he taught a lot of stuff from Ken Perlman, who is a brilliant arranger of Irish and Scottish music for clawhammer banjo. So that really saved my bacon, really, because all the music I wanted to play, I was able to sort of analyze how Ken arranged this kind of music and had a go at doing it myself. And that's kind of how it all started. But by this point, I'd got into old time and bluegrass and everything else. But I'm probably one of very few people in the world, I imagine, who took up 5-string banjo, having never heard of bluegrass or old time at all. There probably aren't many people for whom that's true, but that was definitely true for me. It was totally new to me. I discovered it all, again, about a year into playing. I think "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou" soundtrack was my introduction to bluegrass. And I was
same for a lot of people, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I grew up in England too, up until about 9 years ago. So I spent 75% of my life south of London, whereas you are kind of you're Midwest, so you're just kind of northwest of Birmingham. So a different part of the country, but it's not a giant country. Your love of jigs and reels and Scottish and Irish music, did that come from your location? Because I got to tell you, it was never on my radar growing up at all. And so I wonder if it's kind of a geographical element to it, or how did that come about? How were you exposed to that?
Yeah, not geographical at all. It was only really because my dad's from Liverpool, and like many people from Liverpool, his family background is very Irish. So his mum and her sisters, there were 7 of them, and they all played and sang. I never actually heard them do it because I just didn't. They were all quite old by the time I was
Sure.
sort of into it. But Dad had a lot of tapes, would have been tapes at the time, of
I love tapes.
Irish music. Yeah, of Irish music. So I used to listen to loads of that stuff when I was young, and it just hooked me then, and it hooks me now. To be honest, I just absolutely fell in love with it even then. And I think, as I say, even now, just when you kick into a reel or a jig, there's just something irresistible about it. I just love that kind of music. And while it's reasonably unconventional to play it in Clawhammer style, it's been done. As I say, Ken Perlman is a great arranger of it, but. I guess Ken is very much he's very much someone who's been out to those places and he's found the raw traditional tunes and learned them from the source players and that kind of thing. I suppose as a kid, I didn't really have that. I wasn't around the folk scene. We didn't go to festivals or anything like that. So it was whatever I heard on the radio, or obviously as the internet became the internet as we know it, I started to listen to more and more of that stuff. But I suppose the tunes I've arranged or written are kind of from very traditionally influenced, so very much kind of jigs and reels and that type of thing. But the newer wave of tunes, and particularly when I went to university at 18, I was surrounded by a lot of young players who were playing all the sort of what I might call new traditional tunes, kind of obviously basically brand new tunes, but kind of written in the traditional mold. And then one of my hobbies has become to write jigs and reels, but trying to use influences from other fields. So you mentioned the Whiplash reel, which was my sort of Indian influenced reel. I've written a tune that's bluegrass influenced jig. I've written a few different. It's one of my main hobbies, I think, is to try and write in the frame of a jig and a reel, but to use influences from elsewhere. I guess that's how I'm trying to keep the tradition going, but also, take it in a slightly new direction as well, if I can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got a lot of people tuning in today from the UK, which is awesome. Hi, everybody. I'm just reading the chat on the second screen here. But there's a lot of people from the US. And just to touch, is there something that defines a jig and a reel to you? Like the people, maybe people who are not familiar with it, can you kind of explain what they are?
Definitely. So jigs and reels are essentially originally both dance tunes. And the main difference is that a jig is in 6/8 time. So for those not, who maybe not sure what that means, it basically means we feel it 6 quavers in the bar. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you get that. That kind of thing. And then a reel is in 4/4 time, so it's got 4 beats in the bar. Not dissimilar to a lot of old time tunes. Indeed, a lot of old time tunes are basically slightly reworked reels a lot of the time. But my sort of rather simplistic analysis of it is that a lot of old time tunes, the actual melody itself has a little bit more room in it, but the room tends to get filled with, in the case of Clawhammer, things like the bum ditty strum, and we kind of fill the gaps with that. And then in bluegrass, players tend to fill it with the rolls. Whereas in reels, basically, it just gets filled with more notes. So generally, reels tend to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. There's generally not nearly as much space in the actual melody itself.
It's a lot busier, a lot more rapid paced.
Exactly, yeah. So, for instance, tunes like Red Haired Boy and Hop High Ladies are essentially American versions of Irish and Scottish tunes. So Jolly Beggar Man and Mrs. McLeod's Reel are the original tunes, and Red Haired Boy and Hop High Ladies are the American versions of those tunes.
A lot of crossover, right, over the years. Do you play tenor banjo at all? Do you play any of the 4-string stuff, or do you stick to the 5-string?
I basically stick to 5-string. My girlfriend bought me a mandolin last year for my birthday, which was amazing. And a mandolin is the same tuning as a tenor banjo. So I've learned a few tunes on mandolin. So I suppose to that extent I can play tenor banjo, although I've never actually tried it on tenor banjo. But no, I think, to be honest, it was all a very happy accident, the Clawhammer thing, because I think if I'd have learned tenor banjo, I think I was passionate enough that I would have learned it, but I think I'd have probably been a reasonably kind of generic Irish tenor banjo player. And to be honest, there are some incredibly good Irish tenor banjo players who would probably do it a lot better than me. So I'm kind of glad that I ended up in a slightly different world and kind of ended up combining the various things that I liked. I think that sort of gives me a bit of a place, because I think if I'd have been a conventional old-time player or a conventional tenor banjo player, I'd probably be, you know, as I say, there'd be lots of people who do it very well already, whereas I guess my place has been to try and mix those things up a little bit.
You certainly carved out a very unique position for yourself, you know. Just reading the chat right now, as far as like everyone is just, I've seen that 5 times, he's just a master, you know, all these amazing comments, and it's that's great to see, you know, because it turns heads. I think it's really cool. I want to just ask one quick question about kind of your style a little bit. I'm going to have Dave take over some of the questions so I can talk to some of these delightful people in the chat here and maybe get some questions from them. But your style, you know, is pretty, you know, it's a clawhammer thing. I remember watching you play the whiplash reel.
Yeah.
And it's not too dissimilar from the way you were playing, especially when you start getting into the real funky stuff. It's not too dissimilar from almost like a slap bass type effect with the right hand. And I'm talking as a bass player. Would you be willing to kind of go into some of that, particularly on the funky side of things, like, because you're pretty well known for that? What are you doing? What are the mechanics behind what you're doing with the banjo at that point?
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly trying to recreate the feel of slap bass. It's actually not all that similar to the technique itself, because there's no real slapping of the strings involved. The only thing I hit really is the banjo skin. That's really the main thing that I use. And I would actually say that most of my playing, I think I sometimes get asked at the camps and things, you know, what kind of weird technique that we've never seen before are you doing? And I don't actually think there are that many of those. I think it's more what I use the conventional techniques for that's the different bit. In the case of the syncopation funky kind of thing, so one day, a very long time ago now, I think I was working on a song called Hammer and Nail, and just sort of semi-accidentally ended up with this riff. And that was kind of like, oh, I like this, you know, I think this kind of works. And to slow it right down, I'll maybe get a bit nearer to the, I'll try not to, although the microphone's there actually, so that might not be a good idea.
It's okay, it sounds pretty good. It's not peeking out, so you're fine.
Visually, I'll get a bit nearer anyway. So that riff, for instance, I'm basically doing a fairly conventional slide and then a drop thumb. And that's probably the less conventional bit, is I'm basically hitting the skin on beat 3. So I'm trying to recreate that sort of drum. I'm trying to create that feel, basically.
Percussive, yeah.
And then I'm doing this is probably where the slap bass bit comes in, is after that hit, I'm doing quite a, for want of a better word, quite a twangy thumb note there with my kind of a drop thumb.
Yeah, quite a pronounced kind of lift of the string, almost.
Yeah. So that, I think that's probably where so there's quite a lot of syncopation and that basically means I'm not hitting a note on the downbeat, which ordinarily you would do quite a lot in Clawhammer. But I'm using a lot of drop thumbing on the off beats, which is what creates that sort of sound. And I recorded a tune called Funky Haystack a few years ago, where a great deal of the melody was actually on the off beat. So virtually all the melody was actually being played with my thumb. So if you've got
to give us a few bars.
I'm barely playing anything with my finger. It's all kind of with my thumb off the beat. So you're getting a lot of that kind of effect. So it's actually all the conventional mechanics of Clawhammer, but just with very few, as I say, a lot of notes missing on the downbeats. And instead of hitting strings, I'm hitting the banjo, basically.
Dig it. I think it just adds something else, you know, just a little percussive, a little funky, groovy. Brian Kavanagh, as you saw that one, he talks about the kind of funk element a lot. And so it's interesting to see. It's a little bit different approach, but it certainly has that same effect. So, Dave, I'm going to hand over to you for a little bit while I can talk to some guys over here. So here we go.
Yeah, can you kind of explain the difference for everybody between like traditional clawhammer and melodic clawhammer playing a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I guess with traditional clawhammer, the main kind of function of it, I guess, certainly in the eyes of many, is that the fiddler is the boss, is the star, and the banjo's role is to provide that rhythmic percussive accompaniment with bits of the tune thrown in, but the main priority is to provide the rhythmic kind of drive, I guess.
Yeah.
So actually, Ken Perlman, who I mentioned earlier, he's just written a really good new book about this, where the traditional old time role, as he, certainly as he sees it, was, as I say, very much to be the supporting role to the fiddle player. Whereas the melodic approach, which is what he's certainly famed for, and I think is very much the camp that I tend to fall into, is to basically treat the banjo more as a solo instrument and a lead instrument in its own right. So his new book is all about playing those old-time tunes, and rather than just supporting the fiddle player, actually trying to recreate what the fiddle player does on the banjo.
Right.
So I suppose, putting it very simply, it tends to be less of the chords and more of the melody side of things. And I've always been sort of wondering about this, because as I've grown, sort of, you obviously think about your music all the time, and when I play particularly the Irish stuff and the Scottish stuff, I think to myself, well, in many ways I'm trying to emulate what the tenor banjo does, which is because tenor banjo play with a plectrum and it's very sort of crisply clear played, or when it's played well anyway. And I suppose in many ways that's what I'm trying to recreate with clawhammer. But part of me thinks, some people might say, well, why don't you just play tenor banjo then? Why try and imitate what someone else does? And I think my answer to that is that I still like to try and use the drive and the qualities that clawhammer has, because clawhammer has that, as I say, that rhythmic drive, that very pronounced percussive drive. And even though, as I say, those tunes often don't have that much room in them for some chords, you can still put them in, I think, a bit more effectively than you can with tenor. Right. Not that I'm turning this into a competition between tenor and clawhammer, but I just mean that clawhammer, I think, can play Irish music in a way that hopefully stays true to the spirit of the music, but also puts its own stamp on it. And I guess that's my approach to melodic clawhammer, is that I'm trying very much to treat it as a lead instrument and a melody instrument, but also trying to stay true to what made traditional old time clawhammer great as well, which is that percussive drive. Because I remember when George first played to me on my first lesson, he just demonstrated clawhammer, and I was like, where is all that coming from? That sounds like three instruments. Like, how is that even possible? I was just fascinated by it, and I, in many ways, I still am, even though it's what I do. I still find it amazing that you can do that with one instrument,
Yeah. So how do you get all of those notes when while playing clawhammer? Because it's tricky, because you're generally just kind of going down, and so you don't have both ways to go. You can do some drop thumbing, but are you doing anything else to get those? There's a steady stream of eighth notes happening all the time on like a reel or something.
Yeah, there's a few different ways. I think, as you say, drop thumbing is a big one. So I guess when I'm arranging tunes, I'm very much approaching it from the angle of, on each beat of the bar, I know that it's almost certainly going to be a down pick with my nail. Right. What happens on the upbeat could be a combination of, so certainly drop thumbing. Left hand slurs are great as well. So things like pull-offs and
a lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs and things.
I do a lot of that, and I also do a lot of the alternate string ones. So a conventional hammer-on would be to play a string and then hammer on to that same string, or from one fret to another on the same string. Right. And same with pull-off. Whereas what I use quite a lot of are the off-string pull-offs, where I hit one
style sort of thing,
and then on the offbeat, use my left-hand finger to get that note. I much prefer that as a technique to I find off-string hammer-ons often sound rather weak. So I often think of them as a little bit of a last resort. If I can't think of any other way to get that combination of notes, then I might use it, but generally it's, as I say, a little bit of a last resort. I'm quite fond as well of the technique where you can play one string and then follow through down the strings as well.
Right.
So in fact, that first tune
I saw that. I saw that on that
the
first
real
tune. I saw it a few times. That was with your finger or your thumb doing that?
a bit of both actually. Yeah. So if I slow it right down. So you've got a finger, thumb,
Yep.
finger, follow through, thumb. So it's kind of any combination of, however I get that combination of notes. It's sort of it's a bit of a game trying to figure out how to do it, and it's kind of, sometimes there are easier ways to play things, but I go for the harder option because it has a better quality of sound.
Right.
Because often there are certain notes that I don't want to be slurred, so I don't want like a slide or a hammer or something. I want a proper strong note, and generally the strongest notes are going to be found with my finger or my thumb. And you mentioned about the sort of down up thing, because with descending runs, it's generally easier because of drop thumbing. We can just, we can do that. When it's an ascending run, that's a little bit more awkward. So generally, it's often a case of trying to find, like if I've got, let's say, a G and I want to go up to an A, if I don't want to have a hammered note, I'll have to find the A on my fourth string and drop thumb it that way so that I get sufficient strength notes.
Similar to melodic playing than the three-finger style, where you have to, I don't know. Similar idea.
It is exactly, very similar idea. And the other complication in the Celtic tunes is that they use a lot of same note triplets.
Yeah, that's what I was wanted to ask you, because I was watching your duet with Bruce McGregor on Facebook.
Oh yeah.
And I noticed right away you're doing, the triplets like a tenor banjo player would do. And I couldn't instantly figure out how you were doing that. So I mean, I've never seen it on somebody playing Clawhammer doing that before. So
I'm probably about to reveal a dark secret that I'm going to regret, but there's a couple of ways of doing those. The truth is they're really hard in Clawhammer, because not that I'm a Scruggs player, but I would imagine as a Scruggs player it's slightly easier because you've got the picks and you essentially just play.
Definitely, yeah. It's hard to get it clean, but it's definitely easiest with a flat pick on tenor. But
yeah, exactly. So Ken Perlman again came up with this technique of using essentially your playing nail as a pick. So playing down, up, down with your actual playing finger.
So one finger going down, up, down, up.
Yeah. So like that. The problem I have with that is I'm not very good at it, and especially not when I'm playing fast. So there are two solutions that I use. One is to find the same note on an adjacent string and play one string, drop thumb the other, and then play the first one again. Like that. Oh, sorry, I didn't do that very well. But to be completely honest with you, this is where the dark secret comes in. I often cheat altogether and basically play a triplet that sounds like a same note triplet but isn't quite. So I actually play, so in fact that Bruce McGregor tune sounds like a same note triplet, but analyze it closely and I'm actually playing the note, doing a kind of hammer on and then pulling off again. So it's actually not exactly the same note, but my way of doing it, try and make the hammer quite percussive so that it doesn't sound too much like it's
right. Yeah,
it kind of makes it sound more of a percussive thing, so it does come out hopefully very much like a same note triplet. And my justification for it is that usually the speed is sufficient that no one really notices that it's not the same note anyway. But also just that it's the best way to get the effect and stay true to the spirit of it, but recognize that the style isn't designed for it, and it's kind of hopefully a cheat that works and satisfies enough of each aspect of the the dilemma to make it work.
I think it works. It sounded great. I didn't notice it. You know,
That's good. I'm very glad you didn't notice. I'm only sorry that burst that bubble. But I'm glad you didn't notice.
It's always good to know the little secrets that make things a little bit easier.
Absolutely, yeah.
Are you using also, because doing that down up thing, are you using a fake nail, or do you have your nails grown out?
It is my actual nail at the moment. I do sometimes wear a plastic finger pick, because a little while ago, to be honest, my nail really hurt, because I think I'd just been playing so much for so long and it had taken its toll a little bit. And I remember thinking, well, at the moment I can play okay, but if on the night of a gig my nail is so painful I can't use it, I don't want that gig to be the first time I ever try with a pick. So I went and bought from the local guitar shop just one of these plastic guitar finger picks. Tried playing with it and actually quite liked it. So for a while I was playing with it pretty much all the time. Just lately I've got back into just using my finger for no particular reason other than I don't know, I guess especially with lockdown and everything, because I just sort of pick up the banjo and play.
The pick wasn't by you.
And think of the neighbours, of course. I think I sort of realised that actually my nail was okay again, and so lately I've just been playing with my nail. But I think if, for instance, I split it or it, for whatever reason, then I might use a pick at that point.
And you're using your middle finger.
I generally do, yeah. I can. I've used my index before just because it's nice to have the option if one of them splits or whatever. But generally, I would say I'm a middle finger player. Yeah.
Very cool. Jamie, do we have any questions coming in right now?
We have a few actually. You actually just answered one of them. So about the finger pick. So that was perfect. I was curious myself. There's certainly a few, one guy in particular, but there's a couple of people who have had similar sentiments. Tenor guy, playing tenor, playing kind of jigs and reels, but is kind of experimenting and moving into 5-string and looking for some advice on that transition. Moving over from one, again, playing similar style of music and maybe picking up some of those traditional pieces, but on a 5-string. Any advice for those guys?
Yeah, I think from a technical perspective, I guess flat picking and clawhammer are more similar than it might appear. So I guess I was always taught. I had some guitar, because I play guitar too, and I had some flat picking lessons with Chris Newman a while ago, which was really great. And he basically taught me the idea that on the beat you use your down pick, and on the upbeat you use your you pick upwards. So you basically have this ongoing down up down up down up thing. In the case of 4/4, that is. If you're playing a jig, it's more like down up down down up down down up down down up down to get the sort of accent in the right place. And really, I would apply exactly the same logic to clawhammer. It's just that our down pick is our nail and our up pick is our thumb or left-hand slur type thing. But it's basically trying to create that sort of rhythmic stability in terms of the timing, because I think realistically you're not going to downpick every quaver because it would sound horrible and it would probably kill your arm. So it's much better to kind of have a very firm idea of where you are in the bar. So what I would say to someone who's playing a reel for the first time, whether they're coming from tenor banjo or not really, is if the bar is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and there are eight notes there, then just think carefully, okay, on the 1 I want to be playing with my finger, on the and I want to be using either my thumb, and if that's not possible, a left hand slur of some kind, and just really be quite systematic about it to begin with, which might feel very kind of mechanical and not very free and easy, but actually if you sort of ingrain those technical habits early on, then I think you can begin to apply them a bit more subconsciously, and then you won't need to think about it quite so much. But I think it's important to do it systematically to begin with to make that transition work. I think that's how that's probably my number one tip, I guess, would be just to think about it that way.
That's great advice. I think that probably answered the question for a number of guys on the chat line there, which is really cool. Blue Tuesday, who's in the UK, watching, asks, do you play any slip jigs?
Yes, one or two. Yeah, I do. I like slip jigs a lot. So,
Yeah. I don't know what that is, so you're going to have to demonstrate.
yeah. So
and explain.
slip jigs are in 9/8.
Ah,
So I mentioned earlier normal jigs are in 6/8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Basically, a 9/8 jig is exactly the same, but with an extra group of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like that.
do you mind giving us a quick
I
couple
could,
of
yeah.
bars, or is that something put you on the spot?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, I might combine two of my favourite influences because one of my more recent tunes is a slip jig, but I wrote it. It's one of my slightly Indian-inspired numbers. So this was, in fact, the last time I went to India was with Deering Banjos. And
Stop there, because I'm going to segue into that in a minute. So.
Oh, right, okay. Well, this was a tune I heard that trip anyway, or no, not this tune, but this Indian Raga was one I heard on that trip, and I thought I really love that sound. I want to write something that uses a bit of that. So this is the result. So this is called Sunrise Jig, and this is this is a slip jig. So it's in 9/8, but using a bit of an Indian scale. Here we go.
Was really cool.
Yeah.
I was trying to count the whole time, but
Yeah,
it was,
I mean, sort of the more the more sort of astute listeners may have noticed that I completely forgot my own tune the first time round, but the second time it was all there.
So you kind of tipped on this, but right before we went into that demonstration, you've spent you've been to India a few times, not just the one time with the Deerings, but you've been on several trips there. Probably most recently, I think, with the Deering family, with Greg and Janet and Jamie. Give us an insight. I mean, not necessarily about that trip in particular, but going to India, seeing just a completely different part of the world. How do they react to the banjo as an instrument, and kind of what are the similarities there? That's got to be a pretty intriguing experience.
Yeah, it was. It was. I think the first time I went was in 2013, and at that point I'd never actually done any foreign touring, so it was quite an introduction to go to India, and it all happened quite last minute. So I was invited by the English Folk Society, basically. They sort of had this project with the British Council in India, so they put together 4 Brits and 6 musicians from India, Bangladesh and Pakistan, and basically a bit like the transatlantic sessions kind of idea. So sort of bunged us in a hotel for a couple of weeks and encouraged us to jam and come up with stuff, and then and then they said there'd be an informal sharing at the end, which was a lot more formal than I expected from that. To be honest, it was more like a gig essentially. But the whole experience was amazing because for me, I was already quite interested in those sorts of scales. So things like some of those sort of Middle Eastern scales and things like that. I was already really interested in that. But not specifically the sort of Indian thing. And then when I went out there and I was sort of in a room with a couple of these musicians who didn't really speak much English at all, and this sitar player sort of played something at me and just paused and looked at me. So I kind of tried to find the notes on the banjo, and I just sort of, it seemed to actually fit quite well because I was familiar with some of the scales already, but the whole thing of sort of bending the notes and trying to recreate that sitar-like sound, it sort of, again, happened a bit like my entire musical career. It happened slightly by accident, but it was something I thought was really good. And it was a real example of how powerful music is as a communicator between us. Because as I say, we didn't have a lot of language in common, some of us. And so I think the Indians were, in answer to your question, the Indians were really interested in the banjo. They were interested in, I think, any instrument. It was interesting, the trip with the Deerings, we went to a festival in Jodhpur, and we had a Deering Good Time banjo with us, and we sort of invited some of the Indian guys to have a go on it, and they immediately, all of them went like this, put the banjo down, and sort of
interesting.
Went at it in a complete, in a way that we obviously just wouldn't expect people to play those instruments, but they really were as fascinated with the banjo as I was with their instruments. It was a real, I was really sort of touched by the attitude of the Indian musicians, because I was terrified, because I sort of accidentally ended up, I think they thought maybe that oh yeah, there you go, yeah. So I think they maybe slightly thought that I knew what I was doing, just because I was able to sort of pick out the scale and have a bit of an improvise with them. And what I was trying to do was sort of copy some of their sort of musical cues. So they use quite a few things like this. Those sorts of patterns. It's often like their cue to like the end of a section or the end of a solo. And I sort of picked up on this and tried doing it at the end of my solos. And I think they ran away with the idea that I had a clue what I was doing, which, as I say, I totally didn't, really. But I think what I was touched about was because of that, anyway, because they thought I knew what I was doing, poor fools. I ended up playing this raga in this gig in Calcutta in front of Indian people. And I was terrified because I was thinking, I'm going to get completely rumbled here as the bloke from England who hasn't got a clue what he's doing. And actually, their attitude was very much, we're just so touched that someone from outside India wants to play our music. That's what they were really pleased about. They really thought that was wonderful, that we wanted to try their music. I remember at one point in the gig, another of the musicians from England did a vocal harmony in Hindi, and the crowd cheered like someone had just scored a goal in a football match. Like they were just like amazed that someone was singing their language. That was a brilliant thing as far as they were concerned. So it was a really nice attitude, the whole thing. And I ended up touring with this Indian sarangi player, Suhail Yusuf Khan, an incredible musician, and we ended up doing everything from Indian ragas to Shady Grove and things like that, and kind of a whole bunch of different stuff, because we were both so keen to sample all the different kinds of music, and that was an amazing experience. And obviously it's had a lasting effect on my music as well. I've written a few things that are Indian influenced.
It certainly comes through really well, and the banjo, that kind of sound lends itself really well to almost trying to recreate that sitar type effect, which is really cool. It's interesting because I know there's a couple of artists that we have out here in the US who have in the age of COVID, not being able to travel and doing all this kind of thing, they've really used technology to link up with certain people abroad. So, Hank Smith, I know, is doing regular spots online with people in the Netherlands and parts of Europe that he actually may not have otherwise been able to do as regularly. Has any of that come up with you, as far as maybe some of the guys in India at all that you met or have had the chance to collaborate with going into this weird time?
It is a weird time, that's for sure. Yeah, it's happened generally, to be honest. I must give great credit actually to Kieran Algar, who is the fiddle player in my trio that I play with. He sort of, as soon as lockdown struck, he was straight on it, and he started doing these split screen collaborations, and he was kind of the first of my sort of English folk scene anyway. He was kind of the first one to really do it. And I thought that looks like fun, so I thought I'd try a bit of that as well. So I've collaborated with lots of people during this time. So if anyone is interested, if you go on my Facebook page, my Instagram page, or my YouTube channel, there's all these videos are there. There's a couple in the works with the Indian guys, so there should be two very soon. There's one with a tabla player, which I'm really excited about doing, but it's a piece I haven't played before, so I'm spending an awful lot of time working that out on banjo because it's quite a challenge. But when that's ready, I think that'll be really fun. But I've been doing a load of these split screens. So David there mentioned Bruce McGregor, who's like one of the top Scottish fiddle players of all time, arguably. And I managed to persuade him to do one. That was great. Ended up doing one with Sharon Shannon, who's an unbelievable accordion player from Ireland, one of the real legends of the Irish music scene. That was a real thrill for me. That one. That was a really sort of surreal experience. And so I've ended up doing a few collaborations with a whole different bunch of people, which has managed to sort of take my playing in new directions. And also, I very hurriedly learned how to edit videos as well, so that might come in handy as well.
Haven't we all done that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, David.
Are you using any alternate tunings for lots of the Indian music, or is just all generally out of G tuning that you're using?
The tuning thing with banjo, generally I've mostly used G double C or sawmill. Really, other than those, I have used other tunings on occasion, but quite rarely, really. Which is for two reasons, really. The main reason is that when I was 18, I went to university and did a degree in folk and traditional music in Newcastle, and a lot of the sessions there were heavily Scottish, so a lot of Scottish fiddle players, and they would do these medleys where they'd rattle through 7 or 8 tunes, all in different keys. And I think up to that point, I largely played, like many banjo players, I played things in G tuning, or C, double C tuning, or capoed equivalents. And it sort of started to dawn on me that this wasn't really going to work because I couldn't be retuning and recapoing after every tune because I'd never get to play anything basically. So I started to try and work more out of the one tuning. So G tuning became my sort of go-to tuning where I feel like I know the tuning very well and I can find the different scales and the different chords and that kind of thing. But I still love using double C for particular sounds because I think it does have a sound all its own. And same with sawmill. I think they both have a great sound. So in terms of the Indian stuff, though, it's not especially kind of geared towards a particular tuning. My main thing with Indian music is I try and make sure that the bottom string is the root note. Because Indian music has a lot of droney, it's not really built on chords, it's built on rhythms and melodies. So it's quite handy every now and again to be able to hit that bottom string. To have that sort of, banjo doesn't have a lot of bass, so it's kind of the most bass we can have. I suppose I tend to try and use that a bit. And same with double C.
To play in certain tunings, the Indian players, would there certain keys that they generally lean towards a lot?
Not especially from my experience, but I mean, I'd never claimed to be a leading expert either, I might add. But certainly from jamming with them out there and everything, there didn't seem to be any particular sort of staple key or anything, though. But again, double C was quite good. So with Whiplash Reel, which is the one Jamie mentioned earlier. So again, it's handy in this key because I've got that low note there. And Whiplash Reel, I play, the actual tune itself is a reel. then I now perform it with a big section in the middle where I sort of do a bit of improvising. And at that point, it's really handy to have that bottom string just to give it a bit of depth while I'm noodling away on the top two strings. It's actually very similar to how Indians play as well, because most of their instruments are designed where the number of melody strings is quite small, tends to be 2 or 3 melody strings, but about a zillion resonant strings underneath. So the sarangi, for instance, the one that Suhail plays, I'm fascinated by this instrument because, in fact, every gig we did on our UK tour was hilarious because it just sort of turned into a bit of a lecture from him about the sarangi, because you just all the crowd. No one wanted to talk to me after those gigs. All the crowd just gathered round Suhail while he demonstrated the sarangi. But it basically just had these 3 strings that he played the melody on, and then it's hundreds of resonant strings underneath. How he ever tunes it, I don't know. But we have enough trouble with these things. So how he tunes that, I'll never know.
Yeah, and then what was I going to say? Do you play a lot of your recordings are solo recordings? I noticed. Is there a reason for that, or just that's the way it came apart?
Yeah, I did. I sort of did it a slightly weird way around in that my very first album in 2009, I think. That's over 10 years ago. That's scary. Anyway, 2009, I was in final year of university, and I really wanted to make an album, and I was starting to gig more, so I wanted a CD to sell at gigs. But being a kind of naive student, I thought, let's just get all my friends on it and have like a really big fat sound.
Right.
But of course I had no money. So I did a very kind of ambitious album in about 3 days where I had bass and drums and all kinds of stuff on. And there's some of the material on that album I still like. There's some where I cringe no end, but there's some that I like. But my first album was actually quite a band-heavy album. And my second solo album was as well, the same but different. That was, again, I very much went for a sort of Dan Walsh band type feel. But then it sort of dawned on me that, well, most of the gigs I'm doing are on my own. So, I mean, it makes sense to have an album that's a bit more on my own. So I recorded Incidents and Accidents, which was virtually totally solo, apart from a couple of guest appearances from a fiddle player and a mandolin player. And to be honest, that was probably, I was really pleased with that album, and it went down very well. So for the next album, myself and Mark Hutchinson, who produces my albums, he sort of said, well, let's stick with that formula because it works. It's cheap, and it sort of recreates what you do live. So Virgin on the Perpendicular was an even more solo heavy album. But my most recent album was called Trio, which, as the name suggests, was a trio album. So that one was a little bit different. And I play with the Urban Folk Quartet. So that's my other main project, is I play with the Urban Folk Quartet. So in a way, my band fix is sort of met by them. So I guess I then really enjoy doing my solo stuff because it's very different from the material I do with them. And I do love playing solo. I mean, it's one of those things I always come back to. I love playing with other people. I love doing all the collaborations and all those things. But I must admit, I always end up going back to solo playing because I love it just being on stage and just having the freedom to sort of experiment a little bit and it not put anyone else out. And I think Clawhammer, and especially the way I play with hitting the skin and everything, it does lend itself quite well to solo anyway. I also sing a lot and write songs a lot, and I think when I perform solo, I can tell those stories, and that's quite a big part of the show as well. And from a purely practical level, to be honest, touring solo is great because you can kind of just do what you want. So I remember driving through New Zealand on tour, and just if you just drive past some amazing scenery or some bizarre shop in the middle of nowhere, so you can just get out and do it, and you don't have to check in with anyone or anything. There's a kind of a freedom to that I really enjoy as well. But touring with Urban Folk Quartet is fantastic. We get on really well as a band, and we're really missing it because I haven't seen them since March because they've got the two of the band, a couple, and there's quite an ill relative who lives near them and everything, so they're having to be very, very cautious about seeing anybody. So I haven't seen my band at all since March, and that's been really hard because I think we get a lot out of just sitting around rehearsing as much as the gigs, and we're all really missing that, definitely.
And did your so when said your gigs were mostly solo kind of at the beginning. Did that just kind of happen just because that was, it's kind of easier to get solo gigs and just have necessity like that, and then it developed where you kind of found you liked it and were good at it?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, I think I always liked it in a way.
Yeah.
I think even as a teenager, I always enjoyed the element of, I don't want to say control because that makes me
It's the
sound
freedom that
like
you have,
not
you could,
work with me.
yeah, yeah,
But I do sort of, there is a kind of, I like the sort of pet project of, right, this is the material I'm going to do and I want to write it this way and think about it.
mhm,
There is something I like. I think I always liked about that.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think in a way, people ask me, do you not get terribly nervous playing on your own? Like performing on your own.
yeah,
And to be honest, if anything, I'm the other way around. I'm actually
yeah,
more nervous playing with other people because I think when you play with other people, you obviously don't want to let them down. You don't want to play something wrong that derails the entire thing. And also, you've really got to rehearse it and be tight and all
mhm,
the rest of it. And I think as musicians, we've all done those gigs where we've been asked to dep for someone or something and it's all a bit last minute, and I
mhm.
find that far more stressful than
Oh
just
yeah,
playing
yeah.
on my own and knowing what I'm doing.
Knowing what you're doing, yeah, yeah,
But the practical element was definitely always there. It's very handy to play a fretted instrument and sing because you can get a solo gig, and solo
yeah,
gigs are generally easier to get. Logistically, they're quite easy. Let's be completely blunt about this, you generally get a bit more money as well rather than
yeah.
sharing it
Exactly.
in a band. So, yeah, practically speaking, it does work quite well as well.
Did you always sing? Did you grow up singing? Because your singing's really strong, and it's not.
Thanks.
It doesn't sound like something that you're just doing out of necessity because, oh well, there's not a singer around, so I got to be the singer, sort of thing. But you know. So were you as a young kid, were you a singer kind of?
Originally, it totally was like a necessity thing. So my band at school, um, we kind of, I just sort of ended up singing, and never really thought of myself as a serious singer. I kind of thought I'm just singing in this band because no one else wants to.
Right.
um, but I've always loved songs. I've always loved songwriting, and I've always loved, like a lot of the music I listen to is songs. But I sort of thought when I went to university, I thought, well, my singing career will probably be over now because there'll be lots of amazing singers on the course, and I can just concentrate on playing banjo.
Mhm.
And what actually happened was we were doing a module at university called vocal groups. So fairly obviously, it was just all of us singing in a kind of choir, I suppose.
Mhm.
And Sandra Kerr, the legendary Sandra Kerr, one of the tutors on the course, she singled me out and said, "Your singing's great." And that was really nice because I'd never thought of myself as a serious singer
Yeah,
at all. I'd
yeah.
always just thought of myself as someone who kind of sang a bit. But that really gave me some confidence. And better than that, she also said, "You are a great singer, but the way you're singing is going to kill you because basically you don't breathe properly." And she pointed out a bunch of technical things that I was doing very badly because I'd never been taught how to sing. So she was a massive help in that respect as well, because I learned how to kind of
Mhm.
enunciate a bit better and breathe and all that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And gradually my confidence grew, but really it's relatively recent, I would say. It's the last couple of albums where I've actually thought of myself as, where
That's
I've
a
thought that singing is an
yeah.
asset rather than something I do. Because to be honest, the British folk scene in particular is very song heavy. People like
Mhm.
songs, they like singing along. So I kind of, in a way, yeah, there was an element of necessity about it. I was sort
Mhm.
of like, I need to do songs because otherwise, people will get bored of just listening to banjo all night. But now I actually really enjoy that part of it. But I would very much still consider myself banjo player first and foremost. Definitely, I think that's my forte. But I do now enjoy the singing a lot more than I ever did, really.
Yeah. Well, it's really good. And but you mentioned earlier when you were playing, showcasing one of your tunes, you kind of forgot some of the tune as you were playing.
Yeah.
But like you didn't we didn't notice it over here. So
Oh, good.
what that's highlighting is, a lot of players that are beginning players, when they hit a mistake, they stop playing, or
Yeah.
like, can you talk a little bit about playing through your mistakes and getting over that hump there?
Yeah, absolutely. Funnily enough, because I teach a lot anyway, and
Mhm.
especially at the moment for obvious reasons, because I'm not able to gig. So I do a lot of teaching, and more and more I'm feeling that psychology is like as much, if not a bigger part of it as technique. You learn the technique to express the emotion and the communication. And I think that playing through your mistakes is one element of that, where I think that it's really easy when you're playing, as you say, you kind of, I think a lot of the time mistakes happen because you're thinking, don't make a mistake, don't play it wrong. And of course, the minute you do, it goes to pot. And of course, the irony is that you make yourself make a mistake by worrying about making a mistake as well. And it's actually, you play better music and you enjoy it more by playing it with conviction and by playing with feeling. And I know that this is easier said than done sometimes if you're very nervous and all the rest of it, but actually sometimes you do have to remind yourself that you will never play better by playing tentatively. You will never play better by playing with uncertainty. You will always play better by going for it that bit more. And I don't mean playing louder or playing faster. I mean just playing with conviction. So just, and I mean, certainly one of my students springs to mind who is an unbelievable banjo player. But for a while, it was trying to get that student to realize the potential, because they would get to this point where it was tricky and you could see the shoulders would tense. There was a kind of apologetic nature about the playing, and it was kind of very unsure, and it did no favors. And in the end, I think sometimes you have to kind of fake it till you make it almost, and really feel it in your body, nod your head a little bit, maybe in the shoulders, tap your foot, everything to make it feel like you're expressing yourself and enjoying yourself rather than being terrified of making a mistake. Because actually, when you do make a mistake, every musician makes a mistake. I just played a tune on a live stream of the leading banjo company in the world and forgot my own tune, and actually didn't get it back at all. I just went to the A part and hoped that I'd remember it the next time. But as you say, you didn't notice.
Right.
So you do have to sort of, like I say, you just have to kind of stay in that rhythm. And I suppose a more technical bit of advice would be, if you have forgotten where you are, do what I did, which is actually fake it a little bit by just comping a little bit on the rhythm. So let's say it's an old-time tune in 4/4 and it's got a kind of bum ditty rhythm in it or something like that, and you forget where you are in the tune. Just do this for a minute and then start again. And that would be far more convincing than going like, oh no, and being incredibly tentative about it and the rest of it. So
that's great if you're playing solo, but if you're playing with a group, do you have any advice for getting through something?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Song
I think, I mean, again, though, I still think it's quite psychological, because I think it's like you have to take a second rather than just like completely panic. Just take a second and go, okay, where are we? Maybe listen for the start of the A part again, or the B part, wherever you are. Take a bit of a cue, just try and get back as soon as you can, and just stay where you are. But I suppose as well, it's about sort of kind of feeling the tune in its entirety rather than trying to muscle memorize every last note, because ultimately the problem with that approach is if you do lose it, you kind of lose it. When you think of the tune as a round, then at least you kind of jump back in, or even if you do completely lose the tune, I play with a guy called Alistair Anderson, who's a 71-year-old concertina player from the northeast of England, amazing musician. And I'm sure he won't mind me telling you this story, but we played a while ago, and we were playing one of his tunes, but he got to the B part, completely forgot what the tune was doing, completely went off on one, and just sort of quite convincingly kind of, again, just kept the rhythm, kept a bit of the groove. He's quite an expressive performer anyway, so that kind of helped. But really, he didn't play any of the actual tune until we got to the beginning of it again, but no one would have known. So, I think if you can just find something to play that fits in until you're ready to get back into the tune, that's probably my tip, I think.
Good advice there.
Hopefully. I've let you into all kinds of dark secrets in this, haven't I?
I was just going to say, this is like
how
an
to fake it
exclusive.
through and not let anybody know.
For a lot of our audience, Dan, are fairly they're either beginners or they don't necessarily have anything like the experience that you do. So a couple of questions that have come up in the chat here are any advice on things that people can practice on a more daily basis to kind of really find their way through learning banjo and trying to that confidence that you spoke about that just a second ago. It's so important, and if they can compare themselves, hopefully at a time where COVID has maybe passed a little bit and they can start getting out gigging again, and they've got that kind of confidence level to where the technical side is down. What are some things that they can pick up on and kind of keep repeating and going through on a daily basis that might help you or them?
Yeah, I think I definitely am a big believer that it's a lot easier to speed up good technique and sure technique than it is to try and run before you can walk. And I think that's the trap that a lot of people fall into and it's understandable. And God, George will tell you I was the most guilty of it when I was learning as a teenager. But I think that the temptation is to immediately, I want to play tunes. I want to launch into playing loads of tunes. And actually, I think it's that you need to do that a little bit because obviously you want to get the excitement going. I'm just going to retune for this actually. But I think if you can be absolutely sure of your technique and the rhythms involved and things like that, then it'll be a lot easier to play things at a greater speed. So for example, the thing I mentioned earlier about always following, assuming we're in 4/4 time, following this pattern of down, up, down, up, down, up, and knowing that if you're going to play 1, 2, 3, or 4, you're going to be playing with your finger, and if you're playing on an and, you're going to be using your thumb or a left-hand slur. The more that is ingrained in you, the stronger your playing will be, because you'll know exactly, you'll be keeping yourself in time, you'll know exactly where in the bar you are, your notes will have the right accent, all that kind of thing. So I guess exercise-wise, bum ditty and things like that are always just great to practice. You can do it while you're watching the TV, just you can do that till your heart's content. Drop thumbing is a big one as well. So drop thumbing, for those not in the know, I know this is a very banjo-centric audience, but drop thumbing is where your thumb drops down to play other strings besides the 5th string. So again, the more you can practice that and be sure of how you're doing it, set yourself little exercises where you play different patterns in different orders, just so that you've got total control over which string you're striking and getting that cleanliness of note and clarity of note that you want. My big advice with drop thumbing is to get your thumb to land on whatever string you're going to play with your thumb as you do the downstroke. So kind of think 2 notes ahead, if you like. So play that first note and get your thumb to land there. Even if I'm doing that crazy funky thing, my thumb is landing on the string when I hit the skin. It's still the same principle. Whatever it is that you're doing, your thumb needs to think sort of that far ahead. So I'd recommend any sort of drop thumbing exercise like that, of just keeping that going.
Yeah.
Something like this is really good. So bum ditty 1, 2, 1, 5. I do that every day when I pick up the banjo, basically, just to get my right hand warmed up and all that sort of thing. Sometimes I tune my banjo when I do it as well. So anything like that is good. What was the other one I was going to say? Yeah, if you're getting into things like syncopation as well, if you take that pattern that I just did, 1, 2, 1, 5, take out the first note. So instead of 1, 2, 1, 5, you've got like gap 2, 1, 5, gap 2, 1, 5, and then team that up with the bum ditty. And that's a great way into getting used to more sort of syncopated rhythms and just having that kind of control over what you're doing. One of the things I do in my private lessons with students, and also with my new subscription page, which I know we're going to talk about in a bit, is I'm going to do a video on kind of joining in with things, because you mentioned, Jamie, once, this blooming virus has gone and we can get back to sessions and things like that. One of the things that I think people are often nervous about is joining in with a session. They love the idea of it, but it's kind of what to do if you don't know the tune, I suppose. You know, how do I join in with that and make that work? And in the old time sector, you know, being able to sort of back up well with clawhammer rhythms and different chord shapes and that kind of thing, that it's, you know, there's a few little tricks and things that you can learn that can really help with that. And today I was teaching someone and we were doing a session on, she wanted to join in on the banjo with, basically with pop music, with when people are sat around playing guitars, singing songs. We were doing Bob Dylan's Tangled Up in Blue and Natalie Imbruglia, and sort of looking at how you would join in with that and things. And it's you know, it's there's often sort of core things that you can pick up on that hopefully can enable you to join in a bit more easily.
Some really good advice. Really like that. Yeah, you touched on it a little bit. You know, you're one of the many musicians in the world right now that you were relying basically on gigs, you know, the whole time. And so your livelihood to some extent has been decimated to some degree, but you're looking at different avenues. And so I want to give you an opportunity to talk about a couple. First one being a wonderful book, which I have a copy of right here, which is really cool. I'm going to drop a couple of links down in the chat and in the video description as well. But it's really cool because it really goes through the whole introduction, the whole technique and what to look for. But then it goes through some of the songs from your albums. Right. So talk to us about the book and kind of what readers can expect there.
Yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to do a book for ages, and I'd had quite a few requests for tabs of things I'd recorded or things that I'd played live. So I thought the time had come really just to sort of put it together, and I was never quite sure. I'm not completely terrible with computers, but I'm no expert either, so I wasn't exactly sure how to format a book. But I realised it was reasonably, you know, I could do it in a, you know, to a reasonable standard once I'd figured it out. And I was kind of umming and ahhing over what kind of book to do. And in the end, as I say, I thought there'd been a bit of demand for stuff, you know, tabs from things that I'd recorded, that I thought it was time to do that. But what I've tried to do is include a section at the beginning of the book, which is more about explaining how I approach arranging tunes and, you know, technical things to think about when you're approaching any kind of tab. Because it's very much not a, you know, beginners how to play the banjo book. It's a, you know, it's a book of repertoire from my album. So it's, from that point of view, I suppose it's aimed at the intermediate, advanced end of things. But I would hope that the section in the beginning, you know, might well be useful for anybody, because I think it explains a little bit about how I think you can approach clawhammer arranging quite systematically, so that rather than just relying on tabs of things that you want to play, because, you know, you often see it, don't you? You think, has anyone got a tab for this or a tab for that? And actually, I hope that section maybe explains a little bit about how you can go about arranging it yourself. And then obviously there are the tabs as well, if you want to try the things that I've played as well. But yes, I really enjoyed doing the book, and I've got a new one in the works, which is basically a whole load of tunes from the O'Neill's book of Irish tunes, which is sort of the Bible of Irish traditional tunes. I'm working on arranging a whole bunch of those tunes for Clawhammer Banjo, so that'll be my next book. And then I've also, somebody gave me an idea the other day, which I thought was really good, which is to do a book about how to sort of take clawhammer in new directions. So if you sort of played old time for a while maybe, and you're feeling you want to kind of break out of the old time genre, or just break out of the kind of, you know, the bum ditty feel and do a few other things, then maybe a book on how to explain a bit of that. So but the Irish book is, yes, the next one. I'm sort of halfway through it, I guess, at the moment. So
when do you think that might be released?
I would certainly hope, certainly sometime next year, hopefully early next year.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, I just dropped links into the chat for anyone interested for ordering from, it's on Amazon, and it's on, there's a UK link and a US link in there. So you can take a look. And then the other thing you wanted to talk about was you started a Patreon page as well.
Yes.
Everyone, it seems like there's a lot of people out there with Patreon. It's a great way to support artists that you care about, or anyone in the creative field. What, by subscribing and signing up, what can people expect to find in your Patreon subscription?
Yeah. So again, this was in the offing, even sort of before the lockdown thing. Someone had said to me, you should really have some content on your website or something of videos explaining what you do and maybe some tabs and things. So I thought, obviously with the current situation, I thought this is prime time to do it. So there are 3 tiers. The first tier is really for people who would like to support me doing what I'm doing, but also who maybe aren't necessarily looking to learn banjo stuff particularly, but just kind of want to watch some videos of me. So they will get 2 exclusive video performances a month, and also a video where I kind of go into one of my pieces in great detail over how it came about and that sort of thing, and how I wrote it. And various freebies now and again as well. And then the 2 other tiers are aimed at the banjo players. So there's the tabs tier, where you get free 2 tabs a month. It's not really free because you're subscribing, but you know what I mean. 2 tabs a month of varying difficulties. So some aimed at the beginner, intermediate end of things, others much more sort of intermediate and advanced. So 2 tabs a month. And then the top tier is with each of those tabs you get an accompanying video explaining the tab in detail, so really breaking it down and showing you all the individual bits. And also 2 videos a month where I just go into a particular area of banjo technique in minute detail. And again, these are techniques of all different levels. So the first video this month, this has been the first month of the page, it's only just been launched. So the first video is on the right hand basics, so just the very, very basic mechanics. The other video coming out this month is about grace notes, which are known as ornaments in Irish music. So this is where you sort of add a note that doesn't have its own time value, but just makes something sound a tiny bit fancier, basically. So instead of getting this, you'll get those sorts of things. So just little sort of, it's a whole video about how to do that. There'll be a whole video about how to do the funky percussive stuff, a whole video about playing along to things, like really broken down into really, really sort of, minute detail. And the other thing about it is you can ask me anything at any time. There's like a sort of thread within the page where you can type a question to me anytime, and I can hopefully answer it.
And are you taking students on right now? I know you've got a few students out here in the US and as well as the UK. Yeah. So you're still able to teach.
Yeah, still
where can people find out about lessons?
Say that again, sorry.
Where can people find out about lessons?
On my website's the easiest way. So if you go to my website, there's a specific page about my teaching, and you can contact me through there. And I teach on Skype, which actually I was doing before lockdown, which I'm very glad I was, because at least I had some money still coming in. But since lockdown started, I've had quite a lot of new students, which has been really nice. But I'm always keen to have more, and I really enjoy teaching, and it works really well, the online thing. In fact, I think a lot of people prefer it. I think they feel a bit less pressured somehow than when they're right there. So I think that can work really, really well. It's basically a case of booking a Skype or a Zoom call, and payment's easy to do via PayPal and that sort of thing. So it's dead easy to sort out. And I teach people all over the world. It's amazing, really. Yeah, I teach people in Australia and Canada and the US, New Zealand, and obviously the UK. So it seems to work. Yeah, it seems to work really well. In fact, I was teaching someone earlier today in California. In fact, the opposite.
I hope they're watching.
But yeah, the Bay Area end. But yeah. So yes, always welcome for that as well. And obviously with that you do get a lot more interaction. And I think some people learn different ways. I think some people really like the thing of just watching different videos and sort of getting those techniques into their playing, whereas other people much prefer the direct sort of contact with the teacher. So whatever way, I really enjoy both.
Awesome. David, I've got a few questions on the chat line here, but I want to give you an opportunity to ask anything else that you might have.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Maisa. Hi, Maisa. Maisa tunes in every week, and she's awesome. Cool. So we like her. She's rad. She's from Brazil, but she asked a really good question because she says, Dan, considering your innovative technique of playing banjo, do you intend to develop any other musical styles on the banjo?
Oh, yeah, that is a good question. I mean, the short answer is yes, always. Basically, I think I'm always keen to do that. I think there's certain things I sort of do a bit of already that I'd love to do more of as well. So, like, I'm quite into Eastern European folk tunes. So they're in what's called asymmetric time signatures. So whereas we're used to things in 4/4 or 6/8, where it's very much even number of quavers in a bar, they do things like 7/8 and 11/8 and 10/8. So it's almost like the bar sort of, to us Westerners, it probably feels like it interrupts the bar almost. So I want to get into more of that because I only play a couple of things in that ilk, and I'd like to do more of that. I'm keen to do probably a bit more Latin American stuff, and I'm not just saying that because she's in Brazil, but like I'd really like to get into some more of that. I think that's something I've really enjoyed, and I've had the odd jam session where I've sort of, people who actually know how to play that stuff have been playing it, and I've kind of tried to noodle along. But actually, I'd really love to get into a bit more of that as well. So yeah, I think that's probably the one that springs to mind the most. I'd really love to get into more of that side of things.
That would be really cool. David, you've spent some time in South America in the last few years, and you quite often take a banjo down there. Do you ever get into learning any of the kind of more Latin American styles?
Some tango things I've done, and some bossa novas and choro music too, Brazilian choro and
nice.
bossa novas. But I'd like to learn more as well. There's a pretty rich culture, down there, and musically. So, and it works on the banjo,
Is that 5-string you played or tenor?
Tenor, most of it, but some 5-string. When I've brought a tenor down there, I haven't brought a 5-string down there.
Very cool. Very cool. That's awesome. Dan, I got to tell you, I'm getting a few requests for some music, so it might be a good place to kind of sign out a little bit. We've been on for an hour and 20. It's, what is it, 9:20 over there in the evening?
Oh wow, yeah, I guess it is, yeah.
Something like that. And I know it's getting a little late, but got some requests, a couple of requests for Whiplash Reel. One of them is my own request, so I'm not gonna be shy about that. What was the other one? Somebody else put another one up just a minute ago, but I cannot find it. Oh, Tennessee Waltz.
Oh, blimey. Right, okay.
So I'm gonna let you choose. You can play with what you want. One of the things that one of our listeners asked about very early on, though, we got to try and get this done. He asked, get Dan to give us his best Irish accent. Apparently, it's going to crack us up. You don't have to. I'm not going to put you on the spot.
Can I take a guess who's asked that?
Yeah, go for it.
Is it Jan?
Yeah.
So, right, Jan is one of my students who's in Germany.
Yes, he was just asking about where to buy a banjo, so I was talking to him.
Yeah. So the other day we had a lesson, and we were working on Irish music. We were working on Irish tunes, and I think both of us sort of accidentally broke into a bit of an Irish accent and then it just sort of stuck. And then we both started quoting the comedy Father Ted, which we didn't realize we were doing. Well, I think we both knew we were doing, but weren't sure whether the other one was. And then it just got completely out of hand, and my girlfriend...
There's so many people watching right now who don't know what Father Ted is.
Yeah, it's a comedy about 3 Irish priests.
It's amazing.
So I have to... Oh, right. Oh, this is... the trouble is, if Irish people are watching now, this could go really wrong.
Yeah, you gotta be careful.
You know, I used to spend an awful lot of time in Ireland when I was growing up. Parents used to go on holiday there every year, and so I heard a lot of the accent then when I was growing up. So I suppose it kind of comes quite naturally because it's sort of stuck in my head from back in those days. So I like doing accents, so I do, and I guess with Irish accent it's just so it's sort of happy sounding, like it just makes you feel really happy. So I tend to do quite.
Nailed it. Now I just want you to shout "drink" really loudly, and that will be complete.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I can't believe I just did that. Yeah.
That's very good. Yeah, Jan is laughing out loud right now. So.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
All right. Well, enough of that craziness. That was really fun. Dan, any final thoughts, parting words before we break this up?
Parting words.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, firstly, thank you so much to you guys for having me, and I didn't realise we've been on so long. It's been so nice to talk to you, and I know it's a strange time for just about everybody, and this probably sounds like a really sort of pretentious artist thing to say, but I genuinely, believe in music as an incredible communicator between us all, and also an amazing way to keep people's spirits up, and as something to study, something to play, something to listen to, something to enjoy. I think it's been a great kind of almost like a savior for an awful lot of people through this really, really crazy time. And as a musician myself, I've just been utterly touched by the number of people who tuned into my live streams and commented on my videos, and sent me donations on the when I've done the live streams. I've had like a PayPal donations page, like a lot of artists do, and people have been amazing in that. And genuinely the teaching as well. Like my students have really helped to keep me sane during an interesting time to try and stay sane. So I guess my parting words are just kind of thanks to everybody, and to kind of everybody to stay well and stay safe and enjoy music.
Very good.
You're absolutely right. We couldn't agree more. And this is, Dave, what is this now? This is the 7th or 8th, I think, episode we've done.
9th, maybe, I think.
And again, everybody, all the players, very unique in their own way. They've got a very distinct style, very, very different outlook on the instrument itself. But the one kind of thing we always come back into is music helps everybody. Music is the key. It doesn't really matter what you play, how you play it. And it's helping a lot of people get through this insane time. I can speak for myself on that one as well. Dave, I know you're the same way. So yeah, thank you. Thank you. Greg Deering's walking past. Hi, Greg.
Hey,
Greg. but thank you so much. I do encourage everybody to check out the book. Check out the Patreon page. Check out, what's your website? You didn't mention that. What was the site?
Oh yes, danwalshbanjo.co.uk or .com, either way.
.com.
The other thing, basically, if you remember Dan Walsh Banjo, that's kind of my handle on everything. So like my Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. It's Dan Walsh Banjo is always the way to find me, basically.
Perfect. All right, David Bendrasky, any final thoughts for the day?
Just thanks for coming on, and
thank you.
Yeah, yes. Look forward to hearing what you come up with in the future. So.
Thank you.
Well, Dan, before we part ways, I'll tell you, I think we tipped the scale on the biggest views we've had on Deering Live so far. So congrats. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you. Wow.
There you go. All right. So for that, you got to play us out. So what do you got?
Of course. Yeah. Well, the one I was thinking I was going to play out with was because all these genres we've mentioned that I enjoy sort of dabbling in, but when I was 14, I discovered bluegrass, and it genuinely did kind of change my life. And I've been a massive bluegrass fan ever since. And I really enjoy trying to do kind of bluegrass in Clawhammer. So I'm going to finish off with a tune I wrote called Late Night Drive, which is, I like to think it's very sort of bluegrass influenced. So I thought I'd just play out with this one. So thanks so much again, both of you. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for tuning in today. That was really, really fun. Enjoyed that. And we'll see you next Thursday.
Sounds good.
All right.
And this is
Take it away, Dan. have to have a whole different episode just dedicated to what you just did, because that was pretty cool. I enjoyed that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. You guys take care. Dan, hang on for a second. We're going to wrap this thing up.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody, for watching.
Bye.